The man looked like life had stripped him down to his final breath. Clothes soaked, cheeks hollow, fingers trembling as if the cold had sunk into his bones. When Naomi set a warm bowl of soup in front of him, he didn't thank her. He didn't smile. He simply reached into his pocket and slid a crushed $5 bill toward her with shaking hands. "Please, take it," he whispered, voice cracking like it hadn't been used in days. Naomi pushed it back gently. "No," she said. "In my diner, kindness isn't charged." For a second, the man just stared, shocked, almost pained, like her words had struck somewhere deeper than hunger. Because Naomi didn't know the truth, the homeless stranger she'd just refused $5 from was one of the richest men in the country, and her kindness was about to rewrite his billion-dollar will. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as Henry Calloway stepped back into the cold morning air, the $5 bill still resting in his palm, warm from Naomi's touch. For a long moment he simply stood there, staring at it, as if the small piece of paper weighed more than any stock portfolio he had ever owned. His driver, waiting discreetly beside a black sedan, opened the door without a word. Henry didn't move. Inside the diner, Naomi was already helping another customer, her expression composed, unaware of the shift she had caused. She hadn't smiled for approval. She hadn't performed kindness for show. She had acted with sincerity, the very thing Henry had been hunting for in a world that treated him like a bank vault with legs. He finally slipped into the car, his breath shaky. "Did anyone recognize you, sir?" the driver asked. "No," Henry answered quietly. "That's the problem." The car rolled through the gray streets, past people who never looked up, past shops where he would be turned away instantly if he appeared in the same tattered coat. He studied the bill in his hand. Such a small thing. Yet in all his tests, hotels, restaurants, private clubs, no one had reacted the way Naomi did. They had pushed him aside, denied him service, looked through him like he was invisible. Kindness, it seemed, was an endangered species. "Turn around," Henry suddenly ordered. The driver blinked. "Sir?" "Back to the diner." His voice was firm, but his heart was unsteady. When the car stopped again, Henry didn't go inside. He stood across the street, hidden in the drizzle, watching Naomi wipe down tables with a quiet determination that reminded him of someone he used to be. He saw the exhaustion in her shoulders, the discipline in her steps, the strength in her gentleness. This wasn't charity. This was character. He exhaled slowly. His test wasn't over, but he had found the first person who passed. And as Naomi locked eyes with him through the rain-streaked window, confusion flickering across her face, Henry realized something unsettling. She had seen him as a man, not a billionaire. A man. And that made her dangerous. In all the right ways. Henry leaned back in the car seat as the city blurred past the windows, each light stretching like a reminder of the time he no longer had. A dull ache pulsed beneath his ribs, a familiar warning. He pressed a hand there, breathing through the tightening pain. The doctor's voice echoed in his mind, calm but merciless. Stage 4. Months, not years. No amount of wealth, negotiation, or power could bargain with what was already spreading inside him. He had left the appointment in silence. His children hadn't asked how long he had. They hadn't asked how he felt. Marcus had demanded updates on share transfers. Elena had insisted on knowing the status of trust protections. Their concern had been measured entirely in dollar signs. That was the moment Henry decided something had to change. He wouldn't leave billions to people who treated his life like a countdown to their inheritance. He needed to know, was there still humanity left in the world? Was there anyone who saw value in people rather than money? That's when he created his test. No entourage, no suits, no bodyguards, just worn clothes, a fake limp, and a silence nobody questioned. If the world treated him with dignity when he had nothing, maybe he could trust it with everything when he was gone. The results had been brutal. A hotel manager had waved him away without eye contact. A restaurant hostess had pointed toward the exit with a strained smile. Security guards had shoved him aside when he asked for directions. Every polished place he visited had shown the same truth. Without wealth, he was invisible. Until Naomi. Her quiet refusal to take his last $5 had cracked something in him. Not his illness, but the armor around his faith in people. Henry closed his eyes as the car turned into the underground garage of his penthouse. The irony wasn't lost on him. He owned half the skyline, yet the only person who had treated him like a human being earned tips. The pain in his chest returned, sharper this time. He knew exactly what he had to do, but he also knew his children would never forgive him for it. Naomi locked up the diner at midnight, her hands stiff from hours of carrying trays, refilling coffee, and forcing a tired smile for customers who barely looked at her. The rain hadn't eased. It soaked through her thin jacket as she hurried across the parking lot to the old car that needed more prayers than gasoline. When the engine coughed to life, she released a shaky breath, one small victory for the day. Home was a tiny apartment on the second floor of a fading building, the hallway smelling faintly of bleach and old carpet. Inside, the lights were dim. Her daughter, Lila, slept curled on the couch with a blanket tucked under her chin, schoolbooks spilling over the coffee table. Naomi knelt beside her, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. "Mom, you're late," Lila murmured, without opening her eyes. "I know, baby. Go back to sleep." Naomi changed into dry clothes, reheated leftover noodles, and ate standing by the counter. There wasn't time to sit. The electricity bill lay unopened on the table. So did a letter from the school reminding her about overdue fees. She stared at them briefly before placing them face down. Tomorrow's problems belong to tomorrow. But through the exhaustion, one moment replayed in her mind. The old man with trembling hands, and the way he tried to give her that last $5. She didn't know why it stuck with her. Maybe because she saw something familiar in those tired eyes, the same struggle she carried silently every day. She washed the dishes quickly, so the noise wouldn't wake Lila, then sat on the edge of the couch, rubbing the ache from her ankles. She had worked 2 double shifts that week, and more were coming. Rent was due. Medicine for Lila's asthma wasn't cheap, but Naomi never complained. Kindness wasn't something she performed, it was the only wealth she had left. As she finally drifted into a light, fragile sleep, a soft knock echoed from the hallway. Too late for neighbors, too late for comfort. Naomi froze. Someone was standing outside her door, and she had no idea how her life was about to change. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet chime, revealing the polished marble hallway of Henry Calloway's penthouse. His footsteps echoed lightly, a stark contrast to the heaviness settling in his chest. The city stretched out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, glittering, distant, indifferent. He shrugged off the ragged coat and let it fall to the floor. It didn't belong in this world of glass and steel. Tonight, neither did he. He moved slowly through the silent rooms, touching the back of a chair, the edge of a table, small grounding motions meant to steady the tremor in his fingers. The doctor's words replayed again, merciless and final. Months, not years. His lungs tightened, not with fear, but with urgency. Time was shrinking. On the dining table lay a stack of untouched envelopes from his children. Marcus's handwriting, sharp and impatient, demanded updates. Elena's letter was shorter, colder, a warning disguised as concern. Henry skimmed them without emotion. Their priorities were as loud as their silence had been earlier. He walked to his study and opened the top drawer. Inside was a simple card with Naomi's name, written shakily in the corner, the only reminder he had taken from the diner. He placed it flat on the desk, staring at it as if it held the last thread of clarity in his unraveling world. "She saw me," he whispered to the empty room. When no one else did. He picked up the phone. His attorney answered on the second ring, groggy but alert. "Mr. Calloway? Is everything all right?" No, Henry said calmly. "And that's why we need to move forward." The attorney hesitated. "Move forward with that plan?" "Exactly that plan." Henry's gaze shifted to the city below, where people hurried through their lives unaware of the empire built above them. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, shaping companies, fighting battles no one remembered. But none of it mattered now, not compared to the small act of humanity he had witnessed. "We start at dawn," Henry instructed. "The will, the transfers, the protections, all of it. I'll prepare everything," the attorney replied. As Henry ended the call, a single thought hardened into truth. He finally knew who deserved his empire, and it wasn't his blood. The conference room in Henry's private office tower was dark, except for a single lamp that cast long shadows across stacks of legal documents. His attorney, Arthur Lowell, sat opposite him, sleeves rolled up, glasses low on his nose, flipping through page after page with precise movements. Dawn hadn't fully broken yet, but Henry was already seated, posture steady, eyes sharp with decision. Arthur cleared his throat. "What you're proposing, Henry, it isn't small. This will shift the entire company. The entire legacy." "That's the point," Henry replied quietly. Arthur adjusted his glasses. "Your children will contest it. Violently. I know. And the board will panic. I know. You'll need protection. And so will she." Henry's jaw tightened. "That's why everything is sealed until after my death. Her name stays hidden, her identity protected. No leaks." Arthur nodded slowly, retrieving another folder thicker, heavier. "I've prepared a blind trust. She won't be reachable through corporate channels. No direct line for anyone to attack." Henry signed the first document with a decisive stroke. Arthur paused. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain." "And?" Henry leaned back, fingers brushing the edge of the pen. "Arthur, I walked into luxury hotels dressed as a man with nothing. I watched them shove me aside without a second glance. I sat in restaurants that threw me out like trash. Everywhere I went, dignity was conditional." He tapped the paper gently. "She was the only person who saw me without price tags." Arthur exhaled, understanding fully settling. "Then this will be the most airtight will." The signatures continued trust agreements, asset transfers, successor rights, sealed beneficiaries. Each mark on paper was a quiet earthquake beneath the empire Henry had spent a lifetime building. When the final document slid into place, Arthur looked up. "There's no undoing this." Henry clasped his trembling hands together. "Good." Outside, the sun finally breached the skyline, casting warm light across the tower windows. A new day, a new direction, a new air, though she didn't know it. As Arthur gathered the papers into a secure case, Henry stood slowly, steadying himself against the table. "Now," he murmured, voice low, "let the world react." And he knew they would. Marcus Calloway stormed into the penthouse without knocking, his voice already raised before the door even shut behind him. "Dad, what the hell is going on? Why weren't we informed about your meeting this morning?" His expensive suit was immaculate, but his eyes were sharp with suspicion, not concern. Henry didn't look up from the glass of water he was holding. "Because it wasn't your meeting." 4. Marcus froze, thrown off balance. Before he could recover, Elena entered with calculated calm, her heels clicking against the marble like a warning. "We're worried about you," she said softly, a rehearsed gentleness coating her words. "People are talking. Your behavior is unpredictable. Dum prime menace." Henry's fingers tightened around the glass. "People?" he echoed. "Or the two of you?" Elena sat across from him, crossing her legs elegantly. "Running around the city dressed as a homeless man isn't normal, Father. The board is uneasy. Investors are asking questions. You're jeopardizing everything." Marcus leaned forward, jaw clenched. "We need transparency. Access to medical notes, meetings with your advisors. You can't make major decisions alone anymore." There it was, the truth beneath the performance. Control, power, ownership. They weren't protecting him. They were circling him. Henry set the glass down with quiet finality. "I've made my decisions. They aren't up for discussion." Elena's mask cracked first. "Decisions about what?" Henry didn't answer. That silence was louder than any confession. Marcus stepped back, eyes narrowing. "Are you changing the will?" Henry met his son's stare without blinking. "You'll know soon enough." A storm ignited instantly. Marcus cursed under his breath. Elena stood abruptly, fury blooming behind her polished composure. "This isn't just reckless," she hissed. "It's unstable. The company depends on structure, not emotional impulses." Henry simply said, "I'm tired of depending on greed." The siblings exchanged a look, one of alliance born not of love, but of mutual fear. They realized something was slipping from their grasp. Something big. As they left, Slamming the door behind them, Henry exhaled slowly. The war had begun, and they had no idea how far behind they already were. Morning light filtered weakly through Naomi's kitchen window as she flipped pancakes for Lila, pretending not to notice the exhaustion tugging at her limbs. The night's worry still clung to her. The knock at the door had turned out to be nothing more than a neighbor asking for help, jump-starting his car. Still, her nerves hadn't fully settled. "Mom, you're staring at the stove again," Lila said sleepily. Naomi forced a smile. "Just thinking about work, sweetheart. Work. The endless shifts. The aching feet. The customers who vented frustrations she didn't deserve. The bills waiting like patient predators on the counter." She pushed the thoughts away and set a plate in front of her daughter. When Naomi arrived at the diner, the morning rush had already begun. She tied her apron quickly, greeting regulars with practiced warmth. She didn't see the man in the corner booth watching her, one of the private investigators hired by Marcus. He scribbled notes as she refilled coffees, as she bent down to pick up a dropped fork, as she laughed softly with a customer who needed cheering up. To Naomi, he was just another face. To Henry's children, he was ammunition gathering. But Naomi didn't know any of this. She moved through the day with her usual quiet resilience, unaware of the storm gathering around her name. At noon, she carried a tray of sandwiches to a table of construction workers. At 2, she comforted an older customer who came every Tuesday to talk about his late wife. At 4, she stepped outside briefly, letting the cool breeze touch her face. And every moment, someone was watching. Someone she had never met. Someone who believed she was a threat. By evening, Naomi tucked a few dollars of tips into an envelope labeled Lila's School, humming softly as she wiped down the last table. She felt tired but peaceful. She had done her best today. That was enough. She didn't notice the unmarked car parked across the street. She didn't see the investigator on the phone, saying, "Yes, we found her. She matches the description." Naomi locked the diner door and walked home, completely unaware. Her life was no longer her own. The storm inside Henry's penthouse grew quieter, but only on the surface. Beneath the polished floors and controlled voices, something darker was unfolding. Marcus and Elena had moved from suspicion to strategy, and neither was willing to wait for answers anymore. In a private office downtown, Marcus slammed a folder onto a polished table. "Find something," he snapped at the investigator. "I don't care what. Debt. A complaint. A flaw. I need leverage." The investigator flipped through pictures taken at the diner. Naomi serving customers, walking home, holding her daughter's hand. Ordinary moments twisted into patterns Marcus wanted to exploit. "She's clean," the investigator said carefully. "No criminal record, no manipulation. Nothing connects her to your father." "That's impossible," Marcus spat. "Everyone wants something." The investigator hesitated. "She doesn't seem to." Across the city, Elena was in a boardroom surrounded by nervous executives. "We need legal confirmation," she insisted. "A competency evaluation, a medical review, anything that delays his decisions." She tapped her manicured nails on the table. "My father isn't thinking clearly, and someone is influencing him." "Who?" a timid board member asked. "That's what we're finding out," she replied, voice icy. Back at the penthouse, Henry sat alone in his study, listening through the cracked door as the siblings argued in the hallway, not knowing he could hear every word. Elena's voice sliced through the air. "If he leaves even a fraction of the company to someone else," Marcus cut in, "then we destroy her. Publicly, legally, financially. I don't care." Henry closed his eyes, the ache in his chest growing heavier. This was worse than greed. This was entitlement, sharp-edged, cold, and willing to wound. He stood and walked to the window, watching the rain smear the city lights into streaks of silver. Somewhere out there, Naomi was finishing her shift. Unaware she had been declared an enemy by people she had never met, he whispered to himself. "They're proving me right." Meanwhile, Naomi walked home tired but hopeful, not knowing a shadow had followed her the entire way, recording her every step. The pressure was turning into something dangerous, and Naomi was drifting unknowingly toward the center of a war she never asked to fight. The documents lay neatly arranged on the long mahogany table in Henry's study, each sheet crisp, each signature line waiting like a quiet ultimatum. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, a low growl that rattled the window panes. Henry stood still for a moment, steadying himself with one hand on the back of a chair as a wave of dizziness swept through him. His illness was progressing faster. Now he could feel it in the way his breath hitched, in the tremor beneath his ribs. Arthur, his attorney, watched him closely. "We can pause, if you need to." "No," Henry said. "If I pause, I won't finish." Arthur opened the final folder. "This is it. Once you sign here, everything becomes irreversible. No amendment, no override, no secondary beneficiary. The trust activates immediately upon your passing." Henry lowered himself into the chair, fingers brushing the pen lightly before lifting it. His reflection stared back at him from the polished surface, older, thinner, dimmer than he remembered. But his eyes were determined. He signed the first page, then the next. The sound of the pen sliding across paper was strangely loud in the quiet room. Every stroke felt like a release of regret, of fear, of the legacy he no longer wanted in the hands of ungrateful children. When the last page slid in front of him, he hesitated, not from doubt, but from the weight of the moment. Naomi Brooks, a woman who didn't know his name, a woman who gave kindness without calculation, a woman who deserved nothing, and therefore deserved everything. "This," Henry whispered, "is the only decision I've made without hesitation." He pressed the pen down one final time, sealing the fate of an empire. Arthur gathered the papers gently, as if holding a newborn. "It's done." A sharp pain stabbed through Henry's chest. He gripped the table edge, breathing shallowly, but forced a faint smile. "Good. Good." Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the tower, as if marking the exact second the world quietly shifted. Behind him, the shadows in the room deepened. Henry Calloway had just rewritten his legacy and set off a storm no one could stop. The morning Henry Calloway died, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. Cars rushed down wet streets, offices filled with chatter. The world continued spinning, unaware that one of its giants had quietly taken his final breath in a penthouse overlooking the skyline he once ruled. In his room, sunlight slipped through half-closed curtains, brushing across the empty bed. A nurse closed her eyes briefly, whispering a soft prayer before alerting the staff. His attorney, Arthur, arrived within the hour. Face pale, briefcase in hand, he stood beside the bed for a moment, absorbing the weight of what this meant not just for the empire, but for Naomi, who still didn't know her life had been rewritten. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus and Elena burst through the front doors of Sterling Tower with the confidence of heirs who believed everything was already theirs. They shook hands with board members, offering rehearsed condolences, but their eyes had the gleam of victory. "Schedule the reading of the will immediately," Marcus ordered the staff. Father was meticulous. "There won't be surprises," Elena smirked. "We'll finally get what we deserve." But Arthur, standing nearby, tightened his grip on the briefcase. He knew the storm was just beginning. At the diner, Naomi wiped down a table, humming softly as Lila's latest drawing peeked from her apron pocket. The morning rush was calm, normal, predictable. Naomi had no idea the man she had fed soup to the poor stranger with trembling hands was gone, and she certainly didn't know that his death had placed her at the center of an empire worth billions. Back at the tower, the siblings signed papers, prepared announcements, and rehearsed statements about honoring their father's legacy. Cameras flashed. Reporters gathered. Everyone waited for the unveiling of what they assumed would be a straightforward inheritance. Only Arthur knew the truth buried inside that sealed envelope, a truth sharp enough to tear a family apart. When he finally spoke, voice steady but heavy, the room fell silent. "The will shall be read tomorrow. All beneficiaries must attend." Marcus and Elena exchanged a satisfied glance. They had no idea. Tomorrow would destroy their world. The private library in Sterling Tower was silent enough to hear a heartbeat. Tall shelves lined the walls, filled with books Henry cherished, but his children never touched. Sunlight stretched across the long table where Marcus, Elena, several board members, and Arthur now sat, each wearing a different expression. Marcus leaned back confidently. Elena tapped her nails, impatient and certain of victory. Arthur placed a sealed envelope on the table. "This," he said quietly, "is Mr. Calloway's final will." Marcus smirked. "Let's not drag this out," Indu says. Arthur opened the envelope and began reading. At first, the words were harmless acknowledgments, minor sentimental items, personal notes. Marcus relaxed. Elena even smiled faintly. Then Arthur's tone shifted. "To my son, Marcus Calloway," he read, "I leave my collection of cufflinks, no controlling shares, no cash assets, no authority within Sterling Holdings." The room snapped into stillness. Marcus blinked. "What? What did you just say?" Arthur continued. "Unfaced. To my daughter, Elena Calloway, I leave the portrait of her mother. I leave no equity, no cash assets, and no authority." Elena shot to her feet. "Is this a joke? This isn't real. My father would never." Arthur raised a hand. "Please sit." Whoa. Her face drained of color. She didn't sit. The board members exchanged startled looks. A few lowered their eyes, suddenly aware of years of entitlement unraveling. Arthur turned the page, and his voice steadied. "The remainder of my estate, including all company assets, properties, financial holdings, and controlling interests, is bequeathed in full to a single beneficiary." Marcus leaned forward, veins tightening in his neck. "To who?" he demanded. Arthur read the name clearly, each syllable slicing through the air. "Naomi Brooks." Silence crashed over the room. Elena let out a strangled laugh. "A waitress? A waitress? You're telling me he left billions to a nobody serving pancakes?" Marcus slammed his fist against the table. "This will is invalid. She manipulated him. She had to." Arthur closed the folder gently. "Mr. Calloway anticipated every accusation. The documents are final, legally airtight, effective immediately." Rage erupted, shouts, threats, disbelief. But none of it mattered. Somewhere across the city, Naomi Brooks was wiping down a counter, completely unaware that her name had just detonated an empire. The dinner rush had ended, leaving the diner in a warm, quiet haze. Naomi wiped down the counter with slow, practiced motions, humming softly as the neon sign outside flickered against the window. She didn't notice the black car pulling into the parking lot. She didn't see the suited man step out, straighten his tie, and scan the room through the glass. She was focused on scraping a stubborn stain from the counter when the bell above the door chimed. A tall man approached her with deliberate steps, his expression unreadable. "Naomi Brooks?" he asked. She blinked. "Yes. Can I help you?" He reached into his coat, not aggressively but formally, and produced an embossed card. "My name is Daniel Hart. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Henry Calloway." Naomi frowned in confusion. "Who?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "A client of mine. He passed away yesterday." "I'm sorry to hear that," she said quietly, though she still didn't understand what this had to do with her. Daniel nodded. "I need you to come with me. There are matters you need to be briefed on immediately." Naomi stepped back. No, I can't just leave. I have a shift. I have a daughter at home. And I don't even know who this man is." Daniel softened his tone. "Miss Brooks, this is not optional, and you're not in trouble. But your presence is urgently required." Her chest tightened. "Is this about the old man who came in a few days ago? Did something happen to him?" Daniel paused, surprised she had linked it so quickly. "Yes. Something did happen." The room felt suddenly colder. "I need to know why someone is looking for me," Naomi whispered. Daniel lowered his voice. "Because your name appeared in Mr. Calloway's final legal directives. You've been identified as significant." Naomi stared at him, stunned. "Significant? I don't even know him." "And ever." Daniel extended a hand gently. "You will. Please, come with me." Through the window, the employees watched nervously as Naomi stepped toward the waiting car, fear tightening every breath. She didn't know it yet, but her old life was ending the moment that door closed. The ride to Sterling Tower felt unreal. Naomi sat rigid in the back seat, fingers gripping her purse, watching the city blur past. Daniel's calm voice offered little comfort. "Just breathe," he said quietly. "You're safe." But the uncertainty wrapped around her like a tightening thread. When the car stopped, Naomi stepped out and stared upward at the massive skyscraper, the kind she had only ever seen from bus windows. Its glass walls reflected the night sky, glowing like a world she didn't belong to. Employees in suits rushed inside, barely glancing at her. She followed Daniel through the lobby, her heartbeat echoing louder with every step. They entered a private conference room where thick folders and sealed envelopes sat neatly arranged. Daniel closed the door behind them. "Naomi," he began carefully, "I need you to listen to everything before you react." She nodded, though her breaths were shaky. Daniel opened a file and slid a photograph toward her. It was the old man from the diner, except he wasn't dressed in rags. He was in a tailored suit, smiling at a charity gala. "This," Daniel said, "is Henry Calloway." Naomi's eyes widened. "That's impossible. That's not the same man." "It is," Daniel replied gently. He disguised himself. He was conducting tests, observing people, evaluating character. Naomi shook her head. "Why? Why would someone like him come to a place like my diner?" Daniel hesitated, then continued. "Because he wanted to know how the world treated someone with nothing. And you were the only person who showed him genuine kindness." Naomi swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I didn't do anything special." "You did," Daniel insisted. "You gave him dignity when no one else did." He opened another envelope and slid a document toward her, the official, notarized will. Naomi froze as her name appeared in bold letters beside the words, "Sole beneficiary of the Calloway estate." Her pulse pounded in her ears. No, this has to be wrong. I don't deserve this." Daniel's voice softened. "Henry believed you did. He believed you would protect the legacy he could no longer trust his own children with." Tears filled Naomi's eyes as she stared at the impossible truth. Her kindness at a diner counter had just rewritten a billionaire's world. Naomi stood at the top floor of Sterling Tower, staring out across the skyline that had once belonged to a stranger. The city lights shimmered below, alive, relentless, unaware that its newest guardian had never dreamed of power, never chased wealth, never imagined a life beyond making rent and raising her daughter with dignity. Behind her, board members murmured nervously as Daniel explained the transition plan. They were cautious, respectful, unsure how to speak to a woman who had gone from waitress to billionaire overnight. Naomi barely heard them. Her thoughts were with the man who had sat in her diner, shivering, eyes tired, hands trembling. She whispered, "Why me?" Not expecting an answer. Days turned into weeks as Naomi slowly stepped into her role. She didn't arrive in limousines. She didn't redecorate the penthouse or flaunt her wealth. Instead, she visited every department, meeting employees who had spent years feeling unseen. She listened, truly listened to their concerns, their ideas, their struggles. Changes followed. A rigid attendance policy that punished single parents? Gone. A department severely understaffed? Reinforced. A charity wing abandoned by the previous leadership? Reopened and expanded. Naomi didn't lead from the top. She led from the ground, just as she always had. At home, Lila sat at the kitchen table with new school books. Her asthma medication stocked neatly in a cabinet. Their apartment was still modest for now. Naomi refused to uproot her daughter too quickly, but the air felt lighter. One evening, Naomi visited Henry's grave, a simple stone overlooking a quiet garden. She placed a bowl of soup beside it, the same kind she had served him that night. "I didn't save you," she whispered, "but you saved us." A tear slipped down her cheek, but her smile was warm. As she walked away, she realized Henry had given her far more than an empire. He had given her a chance to prove that kindness could guide power better than greed ever had. The city glowed softly as she stepped into the twilight, ready to build a future shaped not by wealth, but by the quiet strength of the woman who had once refused a $5 tip.